last little bit here, searches by the police. Okay, so this is the last question. We had, can they stop us? Do I have to talk to them? Can they take my stuff? Generally speaking, in order for them to take your stuff or to search through your things, they have to have a warrant. And in order to get a warrant, they again have to have evidence that they show to a judge. It's a little bit higher standard. Before we said just to stop you and talk to you for a minute, they just have to have that reasonable suspicion. They have to think something seems up and I need to figure out what's going on. In order to get a warrant, they've got to have more evidence than that. Probable cause just means there's evidence that a crime was committed and we believe it's pointing to this individual. Okay, a specific individual, and they have to prove that to a judge. They don't have to show reasonable suspicion to a judge. They can just be driving their patrol car, say, hey, it looks like that guy was speeding, I'll pull him over. But for a warrant, right, you have to go to a judge, and the judge has to agree with what the officers say, that, agree that there is that level of evidence. So that is our safeguard against the police just kicking down our doors and looking through all our stuff. So that's the general rule, is there must be a warrant. Okay. There are exceptions to that, though. And that's why there was the question from before, can I call off a search of the police, searching my vehicle or wherever at any point? Maybe, right? It depends, right? Because there are warrant exceptions. The biggest warrant exception, I'm not going to go through all the possible warrant exceptions because there's some that realistically most citizens on a day-to-day basis are not going to encounter. I'm going to go over just a couple that you might encounter more frequently. The biggest one is consent. So let's suppose the police pull you over for speeding, and in the course of the stop, they say, hey, can I search your car? And you say yes, and they don't have a warrant. Can they search the car? Yes. If you tell them they can search it, they can search it. Do you have to consent to a search? Absolutely not. Right? If the cop comes and says, can I search your car? You have the right to tell them no, right? Again, they're not asking to be nice. They're asking to go find evidence, right? So if they say, can I search your car? You have the right to tell them, no, I do not want you to search my car. End of story, period, right? You have the right to say that. So the question then comes up, what if I grant consent, say, yeah, you can search my car, but then halfway through you change your mind, right? You say, yes, you can search my car, and then they start going to the trunk and you don't want them looking through the trunk. You thought they just meant like in the cab of the car. Can you call it off at that point? Yeah, you have the right to. You can say, yeah, I consented to a search, but you know what? I'm withdrawing that consent. You no longer have my permission to search my car. You must stop. You have that right, okay? So that is consent. So big thing to know on that, do you have to give consent to have your things searched, your car, your house, anything? No, you don't. You have the right to say, no, you don't get to search my things. Now, there's going to be some instances where we implicitly agree to our stuff being searched, right? Anybody taken a flight recently, right? When we go on the airplane, does our stuff get searched? Yeah, right. It goes through the little conveyor belt. They have the X-ray thing to make sure you're not taking weapons or too much shampoo on the car, liquids or whatever they're looking at. So as part of the process of flying, we sort of implicitly agree, right, that, yeah, I agree that you can search my stuff in order for me to be able to get on that airplane. So there's going to be some instances like that where you would say, okay, do I have the right to tell them no then? Sure, you can say, don't search my bag, but that bag isn't getting on the airplane, right? You have the right to tell them no, it's just they're not going to put it on the plane. So in order for you to get on the plane, yeah, you got to say yes. But, there's those sort of situations you can look at where, yeah, we agree to it implicitly in order to get what we want, a flight to wherever we're headed. But generally speaking, if we consent to something, we can call off that consent if we wish at any point. Okay. So, excuse me. The tricky part then is, well, what if they keep searching? Are they legally able to do so? The answer is it depends. Have they generated enough evidence at that point that there is criminal activity afoot, right? It's possible that through the initial part of the search, they found evidence of a crime. Maybe they found some drugs in the back of the car before you asked them to stop. Do they have to stop then? Probably not, right? They might have evidence enough to continue at that point. So it's going to depend on the circumstances. But that's something we'll have to look at. We'll get to some of these other exceptions here where that would kick in. Exigent circumstances, think of those as, exigent is just another one of those, one of those times lawyers use fancy words that they don't need to use. Just outstanding circumstances, things that don't normally happen, right? So an exigent circumstance would be like emergency aid, right? You get an officer that gets a phone call to a domestic violence case. They go and knock on the door that they got the call from. Nobody's answering, and they hear somebody scream on the other side of the door. Do they need to go get a warrant before they kick that thing down? No, right? Why? Because they're not going in to search for evidence. They're going in to potentially save someone's life. Based on the evidence and the circumstances, they get a domestic violence call saying that someone's partner is abusing them, and then they show up, no one's answering the door, and someone screams. Yeah, I'm not going in there to look for evidence. I'm going in there to help somebody. So in those instances, yeah, you don't need a warrant. Another one would be destruction of evidence, right? Suppose officers happen to go past a vehicle and they see somebody, using drugs in the vehicle. Do they have to go get a search warrant? No, by the time they get a search warrant, that car's gone, right? The evidence is going to be all smoked. It's going to be destroyed. And so there are some exceptions like that that the police have where they do not have to get a warrant. Okay, so there are some of those loopholes, right? Where you say, oh, well, I told them to stop searching and they kept going. They violated my rights. They might have, but it's possible they may have generated evidence or be relying on another exception at that point. So there are some occasions where they could continue.
Is there, great point. And is there like an abuse of exigent circumstances? Is there a case like, because look, I did remember that due to during 9/11 and after 9/11, police was like without warrant, just just not just what is that, like a get into the house and find people and just do whatever they want. Or let's say one of the neighbor called the police and they are saying, "Oh, those black, suspicious black people in that house is doing something, this and that." And is there any abuse case for exigent circumstances?
Absolutely. Yeah, emergency aid, right? I mean, what's an emergency, right? You'll have cops that go in there. It's like, oh, I thought someone was in trouble. And, usually in those cases, you have to look at the actions of the officer to see whether they actually believe what they were telling people, right? For example, if you're kicking down a door and you're saying, oh, I had to go save someone's life, I thought they were in danger in a domestic violence case, but the first thing you do once you kick down the door is start looking through their drawers, that sort of goes against your argument that you're trying to save their life. You're more interested in going through their drawers, right? So there is evidence you can find to refute what the police claim, because there are going to be occasions where I will say this. I ran into some officers, especially younger officers, who aren't comfortable writing a search warrant. It takes time, there's skills to it, right? And so if they're not comfortable doing it, they want to find the exceptions. Like, what are the exceptions? When do I not have to get one? Like, I'd have cops call me. It's like, what's an exception I could use here? It's like, if you have enough time to call me to ask what the exceptions are, probably none of them apply. Why don't you just, I'll sit down with you, we'll write this, and we could go, to take it to the judge. But, sometimes that does happen. All right. And so that's, again, when it gets to court, that's where you would get to contest that and say, yeah, they came in, they claimed this exception applied, but here's why we say it didn't. Right. So just because a police officer says an exception applies doesn't mean it actually did, and doesn't mean that it carries the day. The court gets to ultimately decide that if it gets to that point. Great question on that. Last one I want to go over here, automobile searches. Generally speaking, this goes along with sort of one of those exigent circumstances I just mentioned, the destruction of evidence. If the idea is, if all the evidence is going to be destroyed, but in the time it takes me to go get a search warrant, come back and search for it, then I don't have to go get a warrant, right? It sort of defeats the point. So the courts have held essentially that automobiles are always going to fall into that category. If I pull someone over on the side of the road and they've got evidence in the car, right, and I have probable cause to believe they've got that evidence, by the time I go get a search warrant, like if I go drive down to the court, that car is not going to be there on the side of the road when I get back. If they have evidence, they're going to hoof it out of there as fast as they can. So the courts have said, yeah, in automobiles, that's always going to be one of these exigent circumstances. The evidence is going to be gone. So if you have, the officers are still required to have that higher level of evidence. They have to have probable cause that there is evidence in the car. They just don't have to go get the piece of paper for automobile searches. Okay, so that is one of the ones you will see on car, with vehicles. They're not, most of the time, if you're pulled over, they're not going to go get a search warrant. If they have enough evidence, they're going to start searching, and as long as they have that level of evidence, that search is going to be legal. It's ultimately up to the judge to decide that, though, right? That doesn't mean someone can't challenge it later. Just because the cops said they had that level of evidence doesn't mean they did. So it can be contested later on in court, but most of the time for an automobile search, you're not going to see cops with a warrant. The one area where that would be an exception, the automobile exception here, where they search cars, the only times they don't need a warrant is where they're pulled over on the side of the road. If they have evidence that there's, excuse me, if there's some belief that there's evidence in a car and the car's in like a parking lot and there's no risk of it leaving, then that exigent circumstance no longer applies, right? It's like, that car's not just going to drive off. There's no driver around. It's just in like a parking lot, like a long-term parking lot. Then yeah, you got to go get a search warrant, because it's not going to just take off automatically or magically here in the next couple of minutes. You have enough time to go get a search warrant and search the thing properly. So, it's not every time a car is searched that applies. It's when you are stopped on the side of the road, in particular, that the officers don't need a search warrant. So, but that really is it for search and seizure. So, so to summarize, right, the sort of the 3 points there. When can the police stop me? If they've got some suspicion that a crime is afoot, right? Do I have to talk to the police? No, I don't. And when can the police go through my stuff? When they have probable cause that there is going to be evidence of a crime in the location they're searching, and generally if they have a warrant or a warrant exception, right? And that's where it's at. So those are the rights in a nutshell that we as citizens have. I think we have I don't know where we at on time, Mehmet. I'm happy to stay as long as people want to answer questions. So
yeah, thanks so much, Jason. I mean, so maybe hold a second. You can exit from the share screen.
There we are.
Yeah. Okay. People, some people ask question on their chat box, or I guess Ahmed unmute self and then ask question. So any question, I mean, it's 1 hour, so 7 to 8, but if we have like let's say 5 minutes, and if we have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions or use the chat box. But it is really informative. Thank you so much, Jason.
No problem. I'm glad to help out. Hopefully people found that helpful. So yeah, any questions you got, I'm happy to stay as long as you need me. So
Jason, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the Gabby case recently, the guy, I forgot his name, why the police didn't go over and search his car and take him under custody? It was an obvious probable cause over there, physical harassment and domestic violence. Everything was obvious. So why the Utah? I found the Utah police very soft comparing to the South. I live in Tennessee.
So that's the case here with Loudry or whatever his name was. I forget.
Yeah, Brian Loudry. Yeah.
Okay. So why are you're asking about the stop here in Utah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
I don't know all the facts of the case, and I will say this: a lot of the times, what gets shared in the media is not necessarily all the story, right? Yeah, because I always feel bad for police officers, right? They don't get to share. It's not that they don't get to share, but they choose not to share everything sometimes. To think if they're thinking long term, they're thinking, oh, there's going to be a trial eventually, and I don't want to say something on TV that every potential juror is going to hear, and now none of them can serve as jurors because they have information about the case outside of what they would hear in trial. So sometimes the news shares more than what the cops actually have as evidence. But in short, when if you stop somebody like that and you've got someone who would appear to have been the victim of domestic violence, why would they not make an arrest? From my understanding, and I haven't followed this too much, but I believe she may have indicated that either nothing had happened, even though it clearly seemed like it did, or that she would not cooperate or testify against him. Now, cops can still, they can still make an arrest in those cases if they wish, but they have to, even though they can make an arrest, but they have to think down the line, I've got to get a conviction. And to convict someone, you need a whole lot of evidence. That's where we have this standard beyond a reasonable doubt that you sometimes hear, that that's the level of evidence you need to convict somebody of a crime if you're a prosecutor. And so if you have a victim that's unwilling to help you at all, that becomes difficult. So I'm not sure exactly why they wouldn't have done that. Could they have perhaps pushed it and done it? Maybe. I'm not sure of all the facts of it, but my guess would have been in a situation like that, that was probably their thinking.
Yeah. You're right. Thank you.
No problem.
Hey, who else?
Jason, this was a very informative. I loved it. Now, there's two things I learned. We can talk with the police without any fear. The second thing is, even if I don't have anything to hide, I should not let them to search in my vehicle or in my home.
Yeah. And you know what? You just reminded me of one last thing I do want to mention here, because this is one of those other misconceptions people sometimes have. If I exercise one of my rights, can that be used against me later on at trial? In other words, if I refuse to talk to the police, can the prosecutor at trial say, well, they didn't talk to the police, they requested an attorney? Does that sound like someone innocent to you? A prosecutor can't do that, right? So if you exercise your rights, that cannot be used against you later on, right? So if you say, I just don't want you to search my car because I don't want you to, that can't be used against you. The cops can't say, well, only a guilty person wouldn't let me search, now I'm going to go get a search warrant. They can't do that. They can't use that against you. So the rights are nice in that regard, right? We don't have to give an explanation, and they can't be used against us if we exercise them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. And also one more thing on that, I saw some cases that police officers, because of the bigotry or because of hate crime, that specific police officers put the evidence, like planting the evidence. I don't know the terminology on that, like planting the drug or like whatever things.
Set up.
What is that?
Set up.
I guess setup. So yeah, so it's happening. So I guess it's good not to, if there's no warranty or any search warranty, it's good not to say you don't have. I'm not giving you a right or something like that.
Yeah, we have these rights just because I'm a little bit of a privacy nut, and so I don't like telling people stuff I don't have to, or giving them information I don't have to. So for me, I have that right with the police as well, and that's nice. I don't have to talk to you because I just don't feel like it, right? And that's all I have to say about it, and it's great in that regards, right? So you do have, it protects against all sorts of shenanigans. And I know we didn't really talk about this one much, but filming the police, right? If you fear that they do something like that to you, there's no constitutional issue or no constitutional provision that addresses that, because cell phones didn't exist when the Constitution was written. But can you film the police with your cell phone? The answer is yes, you can. If they tell you you can't, they're lying. You can film them. And so if you're worried about stuff like that something's going to get planted on you or something like that, you have the right to film them and hold them accountable. A lot of police departments now are using cameras on the officer themselves, so that the officer has to be filming everything they do to hold them accountable and to protect them against false claims by citizens, right? Because you'll have the opposite that happens to officers sometimes, where someone says, oh, the officer arrested me for marijuana, but they sexually assaulted me when they were frisking me for the marijuana, right? And so that they protect the officer too, but we have the right as citizens to film what's going on just as much as they do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And last question, one more question, if there's
Sure.
any. I'm seeing Sam, my colleague.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, I've been on the phone, so you went for a walk with us, Jason. Thank you so much. And
Good, I got my exercise in for the day. Thank you, Sam.
yes. Well, thank you. This has been very, very informative. I don't have a question. I think you solidified some of the things that maybe we're not so sure. It's good to have a lawyer tell you, your own lawyer, tell you that it's okay to be quiet. I always get nervous. I haven't been pulled over too many times that it's like, I think I should say something. And so it's good to know that right is solid, that it doesn't hurt us to keep your mouth shut, essentially.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, so thanks again, Jason, joining us. And one day I will ask maybe Sam to give some know your rights series, one of the topic for that as well.
I can talk about making okra soup in the jungles of Africa. That's sign me up.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jason, and thanks for joining all of you. And see you in next events for Emerald Hills Institute. Bye bye.
Thank you, Mehmet.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.